So the Third City, it was originally a four-piece, but then it became a duo, myself and Dan. And generally speaking, I'm playing acoustic musical instruments, and these are then being sampled live so that they can be played back, sometimes with processing added by Dan using Ableton and a push controller. So each piece is, for the most part, improvised, but we do have a general structure worked out. So we usually know where it begins and where it's heading and how it's going to end, but the actual structure itself is negotiable. So within the piece, occasionally one or other of us decides to take it in a slightly different direction and maybe surprise the other person, and we have to work out where to take the piece and how to end it then.
I think part of it is that it isn't just about watching two performers, it's about watching the interplay between those two performers and the audience.
The set that we had for 2017 and through into 2018 was 5 pieces. Duo utterance, which was based around voice. There was piano based around piano, violinium using violin, itchy scratchy, which combined a homemade instrument that Dan made along with some found sound sources, and drumgatium, which used timbal, a Brazilian drum. And in most cases what we did was have the instrument mic'd up, and that was being sent to the computer so it could be sampled live, and then the live instrument was playing alongside these processed samples. When it came time to write about this work and to discuss it, we were looking for a way of being able to describe the different improvisational roles that we fulfilled within the different pieces. And we considered a number of options, but we settled for the approach used by Jacqueline Waldock. And she described different roles that musicians can operate under within improvised performances. The main ones are solo, which is where someone is taking the lead and presenting a prominent musical line within the piece. And then there are various complementary roles. These go under different names, but 2 of them, for example, are heckle, which is where someone is presenting phrases which are responding to and drawing upon a solo line within the piece. And there's punctuation, which are usually short, often quite loud and prominent interjections which happen within the middle or at the start or end of solo lines, and they usually rhythmically connect in some way. And then there are the conflict roles. So these are various different roles within a piece where conflict is being generated. There's some sort of obstacle being presented. So a block, for example, where one musician is carrying out an action which is in some way obstructing the path that another musician has decided to take within the piece. As a way of introducing the set, and it's at the point where the process people might start to think something's gone wrong, and then they realise that the performance has begun. And what to listen to.
The first piece that we normally do in the set now is called Duo utterance, and it's a piece that plays with the notion of what we're expecting to happen at the start of a performance.
It begins like an introduction, so it doesn't necessarily appear as though the set has begun, as though the first piece has begun. It's more as though we're introducing ourselves, but then the introduction itself is sampled and is being played back, so the meaning of the words starts to become obscured. It means that the different ways of listening end up being used. The audience is being thrown from one to another, there's a tension about what.
Yeah, and we've had people who don't know that it started, they don't know it's a piece. We've had also other people who've said that they thought things had gone wrong within the work. It becomes interesting, I think, in those moments where you hear fragments of coherence from John about the work, and then it becomes completely changed or adapted into something very different.
They should instead be listening to the quality of the sound that's being presented to them. Sometimes they will find that they can't help. Other times, it's much more about making a choice as to how to listen. We've got two other pieces, Piano based on piano and Violinium, working with the violin, which have a similar sort of setup where in each case I'm playing the instrument live, and that's being sampled and played back, usually with some pitch shifting by Dan. One of the big contrasts between these two pieces is the way in which, for piano, I'm sticking mainly to a pentatonic scale, and the pitch shifting is mainly at the octave. So we end up with a piece which is quite consonant all the way through. Whereas for the violin piece, the violin isn't being played within any particular scale, and there's usually sliding through different pitches, lots of different timbres being used, and I think that perhaps frees you up a little bit with what you're able to do with the samples then.
The piano piece is easier in some ways because I know what scale you're playing in. But it's harder in other ways to make something interesting. The violin one, you can play that percussively sometimes, or you can use extended techniques. But I think a big part of it is that we're trying to develop new ideas or sounds with it based on the interplay with each other. So if, you know, sometimes you'll play a low tone on the violin, and then I'll pick it up and then think of a way to play it back to you for you then to change or adapt. And I think both pieces have that as quite a strong element. So with piano, with John playing a diatonic, a kind of pentatonic scale, whatever he plays with the push, these blue pads are octaves. So if I sample him, you know, at C3, if I play an octave lower or an octave lower again, I know it'll always fit. And that's kind of the case with the violin. So if John plays, so if I sample John on that tone, and then when I play it back, I know that. So it's a relative pitch, and it'll always kind of work with itself. Yeah, and I think for an audience perspective, they see John playing violin, and it's quite easy to understand that that is the lead instrument within it. But then when they hear me playing violin from the computer, then that can kind of change people's perception of, you know, what is leading this piece, what is following this piece, what's being complementary within the work.
We're also having to overcome the fact that what I'm doing is far more visible. So, you know, playing the keyboard, playing the violin, or using voice or using drum as I do elsewhere in the set, it's much more visible, and audiences do respond to the things that they can see on stage. There's a correlation between gesture and sound that the other researchers have found, where there's more appreciation of sounds where they can see the gestures that are being used to create them. And so we're making use of that by using these instruments that are being performed, and they're very visible, very visual, but we're also trying to overcome that so it isn't seen by the audience as being the lead instrument, when actually there are times when within the improvisation, what Dan's doing on the push controller is actually leading the piece, and what I'm doing on the instrument is more of a supporting role.
Itchy Scratchy is the next piece, and that came about from when we were in Third City as a fourth piece. I was quite jealous of the other performers in the group who all had really cool instruments. So I decided to make my own instruments. So this is Itchy Scratchy setup, and the way it works is I have 3 little instruments on the table. The first one I call the spoon-fed computer fan, and the way it works is I've got a contact mic that you can clip on. So I clip that onto a spoon, and the idea is that this here is just a computer fan with a little switch, so I can switch it on and off. But if you look at the fins on it, I can choose to make it sound a bit like a motorbike, make it bounce with the fins, or if I use the smooth side, I can make textures like that. Now, what I quite like doing is adding a little bit of reverb, live, unprocessed. So it just smooths out the sound a little bit. So what I'll normally do when I'm performing is I'll record a section of that. And kind of migrate between smooth to bouncy like that. So then, when I've got that recording, I can either leave it doing something, or I can decide to process it in some way. The next part of my amazing setup is an Arduino controlled hard drive. So, you know, a hard drive is essentially like a record player where it spins and it's got a needle that runs across and reads data from it. So I've got an Arduino with a motor shield kind of controlling the way that that hard drive moves. So I've written some what I call bad code, and I've estimated how that works, and what you get is that I can spin it one way and the other way, and sometimes it spins and sometimes it doesn't. If I mic up the hard drive, and then what you get is this kind of interesting sound. So I put some objects in here, and so then you get these. What I quite like about it is you get these loop patterns that are kind of organic, so they're not completely the same every loop. And then that as a recording means I can, you know, by time stretching and pitch shifting these materials, you kind of get some different tonal textures that you can then kind of use on the fly within performance alongside John's stuff. And then finally, we've got the very unpredictable Arduino controlled toothbrush. And so we had the idea of putting a floppy bulldog clip on top of it. Sometimes I'll mic up the actual toothbrush like this. So that's kind of miking up the internal motor of it, and occasionally I'll mic that up. But then what we normally do is John joins me, and John will kind of play the toothbrush while I do various things with it. And a little bit like the other pieces, I'll record John kind of doing this kind of thing. And then, as you can hear now, I've kind of just pitch shifted it, and you get these really interesting kind of tonal pitch shifted structures that we can kind of put together, and then usually right at the end of the piece I just turn it off, you know.
For Itchy Scratchy I'm working with found sound objects, and this is something that I've done a lot over the years, and here I'm working in particular with what would be considered rubbish, so it's bits of polystyrene and old paper cups, bits of newspaper and bits of tin foil, and just having a pile of these objects and with an SM58 in the middle of them, just manipulate them to get different textural sounds. But it's not just about rummaging around making a sound, it's about performing them, trying to make something musical from these sound sources. And then as I'm doing this, I'm also sending to the little mixing desk, got a little multi-effects pedal here, so I can also be applying bits of pitch shifting and setting up delays if I choose to. So it means whilst generating material that might be responding to what Dan's doing or might be playing a lead role, I'm also able to generate these looped background patterns as well. So yeah, these sounds then go alongside the sounds that Dan's making on the homemade instrument.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting, each time we do it seems quite different. There is an overall kind of structure, but I think there's also a collaborative nature with it, in that we don't seem to use heckles and we don't seem to use blocks or things that can be, you know, themes within improvisational music. We tend to have a complementary role within the piece, I think.
Yeah, because in all the other pieces we're directly linked. There's an audio path linking them. There's an amp. My instrument is being sent to Dan's instrument, whereas in this one, for the most part, we're just performing at the same time on our own setups. So it's much more like being in other improvisation situations where you're each day on your own instrument performing side by side at the same time.
Yeah, I think with Itchy Scratchy, quite often the audience don't fully understand what it is we're doing, so they'll see John with a series of objects and they'll hear sounds, and at first they'll make a link between you know, what you're doing, and then they'll see me with a spoon or something, and afterwards people will come up to us and say, you know, what was that? What was that device? How are you making those sounds? What was, you know, so I think there seems to be intrigue.
The piece that we usually use to finish the set is called Drumgatium. This is where I'm performing a timbal, which is a Brazilian hand drum, and there's two microphones on the drum. One of them is just sending a sound to the PA. The other one is a contact mic, which is sending a sound through to Dan, but it's a different sort of relationship to the way that we use the piano and the violin and the voice.
Yeah, essentially the contact mic's acting as a trigger for sounds that are played out if John hits at a certain amplitude. Essentially, I've got some audio material from earlier on in the set, which is John playing piano, because part of our philosophy is that we don't want any pre-recorded sounds that weren't generated on the night. The sounds I have are John playing piano, and I'm using granulator in Ableton to play back those sounds. The part of the sound that we were mentioning before was that John is triggering the sounds through a gate. So if I turn the gate on, and if I was to play a sound, you can't hear the sound until John. Now, part of it is calibrating it. So, for example, if I turn that up and if John plays like before, he can play under the gate, or if he hits it hard. And then with little adjustments, I can also alter the floor of sound so that there's some of the sound, and then when John plays,
The other thing that having the contact mic on the side enables me to do is that when the gate is activated, then just by tapping the contact microphone, it means that the drum won't be heard, but I'm able to trigger the samples over there. So it means that I'm able to switch between performing the drum by itself by aiming just below the threshold, or trigger the drum and the sample by going above the threshold, or just the sample by striking the contact mic by itself. At the very end of the piece, we usually finish with a section where it becomes very playful, and there's a sense in which I'm teasing drum strikes that might not arrive, or trying to sneak in drum strikes, and Dan is holding down pitches as if the sample is going to be activated, but is then releasing, and so we end up with this section where we're playing with each other to disrupt the smooth operation of this hybridized acoustic digital instrument that we've been working with.
Yeah, and the audience respond quite well to it, don't they? It's been said about our work that it isn't just about the sounds we create, it's actually the interplay between us as performers.
Yeah, I think this is the bit of the set where that is most obvious.
Yeah.
And yeah, people smile and laugh and enjoy what we're doing.
And it works as a kind of neat ending, doesn't it?
Yeah, we've really enjoyed working on these 5 pieces, and they've helped us to focus on the way in which we use acoustic instruments alongside digital musical instruments, and the improvisational roles that we adopt when we're working with live sampling. And so we're hoping that we can continue working with these ideas in the pieces that we do in the future.